So here we are with Congressman Panetta of the Congressional District 20 in California. Welcome and thank you for joining me today. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Kim. Appreciate this opportunity, definitely.
Absolutely.
Although I have to admit, I'm getting tired of Zoom calls. I think we all are, and we'd much rather be doing this in person. But this is what it's going to have to do for now, is all of us get through this pandemic together.
Agreed. I'm calling it death by Zoom.
Exactly. That's for sure.
Anyway, but it's great to see your face. I was just saying this would normally be the week we would be in Washington, D.C. on our NAR trip, and so I'll miss that this year, but it's great to see you.
Yeah, you too. And it's unfortunate that so many things are being canceled at this point, not just in Washington, D.C., but here on the Central Coast.
Yeah.
But, I think, we're just going to continue to have to adapt as we slowly open up, but obviously open up in a safe manner. I think this is kind of what we're realizing, that, we're in a situation where we really don't know what lies ahead. And yes, we're all feeling the itch to open up, and we're all basically understanding that there is a public health crisis, but there's also an economic health crisis, and it's not one or the other. I think we have to realize that there's a balancing act that we can do in order to go forward, in order to open up our economy in a safe manner. It's just making sure that the tools are there to do that, and the science is there upon which we can make those decisions to do that. So, with that, what we've been doing in Congress is making sure that there's the funding there for the state and local municipalities to have the resources to then make these decisions and have those tools upon which they can slowly open up in a safe manner.
Great. That's great. It's a good lead in also to our first question is how are you and your office adapting and to this new environment and to service the citizens of your district and handle the workload, but do it safely. What does your average day look like?
Yeah, no, I mean, it's similar to why we're doing this type of conversation over Zoom rather than having
Right.
you in Washington, D.C., visit me out there with your colleagues. We're adapting, we're pivoting, and we're doing that in order to make sure people are safe and
Right.
secure as best as we can. We are essential, therefore we are working. But we are working remotely in that my staff in the three offices that I have, Salinas, Santa Cruz, and in Washington, D.C., our offices are open. We are answering phones Monday through Saturday, 9 to 5, but I do not have staff in the offices. But we are helping a number of people out with the issues that people are encountering with this pandemic, as well as with the relief packages that we are providing in Washington, D.C. So, when it came to the Paycheck Protection Program, trust me, we received numerous calls on that, and we're able to guide people through that process as best as we can from the federal perspective. When it came to the unemployment insurance, although it's not a federal issue, it's a state issue, we were explaining the process and directing people to their state representatives. When it comes to the direct disbursements, the paychecks that people are getting from the CARES Act, the $1,200 per individual, $500 per child, basically we're walking them through how to basically, provide the government, the IRS, with your information in order to obtain that check. And so it's issues like that, on top of State Department issues. So we've had people who have been stuck in other countries, and we've been able to repatriate them,
Wow.
work with the U.S. Department of State, contact that person, not only by phone in country, but then have the State Department in that country contact that individual, and then get them on a plane and get them back to the United States. We've done that, I think, for about 40 people
Wow.
in a number of countries, including Antarctica, to bring them back to the U.S. So we're still busy. We're still working. I am, as you can tell from my background, I don't have the 18th fairway Pebble like you do, which I think we both wish we were actually out there, not virtually.
Totally.
Uh, I work from home, and unless I have to go out and about, and I've been here at my desk doing a number of Zoom calls, working with staff, working on a number of pieces of legislation um, and continue to basically press forward, not just on the legislative front, but on the casework front, making sure that we respond to our constituents, which we do in normal times, but especially now, people need to know that there's someone who is willing to pick up the phone and work them through the issues, especially from my office's point of view and from our perspective at the federal level, making sure, as I try to do now more than ever,
Yeah.
making sure that government works for people, and especially the people here on the Central Coast. So we're doing that. We've done it pretty well, and we will continue to press forward as we get through this pandemic.
Right. Well, I can attest to that. I know your office has always been very responsive for me, and I've even called to try and help some local businesses with their PPP programs, and your staff has been excellent. So thank you.
No, and we've had a nice combination of the PPP, of Katie Moon dealing with
Yeah.
the PPP here at the local level, and then at the policy level, Mark Denon
Yeah.
back in Washington, D.C., basically walking through people, the decisions and the policies and the practices that are put in place. So I think we've been doing pretty good at that. Obviously, we'll continue to deal with it as we go forward.
Great. Wonderful. Well, I know there's a new bill making its way through Congress right now, the HEROES Act. What can you tell us about that?
Yeah, look, let me just kind of start off the strategy that our government has been deploying through this pandemic. There isn't one central strategy, national strategy, for better or for worse. So what it's come down to is, as I've always said, our strategy has been federally funded, state mandated, and locally executed. Federally funded, state mandated, locally executed. And I do believe that in the federal government has actually played its role and done it pretty well in the past month and a half in providing that federal funding upon which states can have, and local municipalities can have the resources to fight this disease. Now, we've passed 4 major bills, close to $3 trillion in funding out of the Congress in a very short amount of time.
Yeah.
Obviously, we had the first 2 bills in the beginning of March, and then we had the $2.2 trillion CARES Act, which was the largest stimulus package in our nation's history, which provided a number of things that we just talked about, from unemployment insurance to PPP to the direct disbursements, helping our agriculture, and so forth. And now going forward, what we had just put forward yesterday, today, and working through it, and I'm still getting through the bill itself, is the HEROES Act, like you mentioned. And in that act, from what I've seen so far, it's all about basically COVID-19 and making sure that we're able to continue to get through this pandemic. It's still sort of an assistance package that's dealing with a number of things. Obviously, in the CARES Act, we had $150 billion to state and local counties or cities, but the direct funding was only to those states and local cities that were above 500,000 in population. Now, we here on the Central Coast, we don't have any cities or counties that have more than 500,000. To kind of put it in perspective, St. Louis, Missouri didn't even get, or you're very familiar with, they don't have a population over 500,000. So they didn't even get direct funding.
Wow.
So in this bill, we made sure that there's not only, it's right now what's allocated in this bill is $1 trillion to state, local, territorial governments, but also we made sure to partialize it, make sure a certain percentage goes to those governments, goes to those municipalities that have way less than 500,000, and actually making sure that there's certain formulas put in place to direct that funding to those cities and municipalities with much less than 500,000, so they get that direct funding. For example, the CARES Act, of that $150 billion that went to the states and local cities, California got $15 billion. $5.5 billion has already been allocated to those states, counties, and cities with over 500,000, but $9.5 billion is sitting up in Sacramento right now. And I sent a letter with my partner to the south of us, Salud Carbajal, asking the governor where the heck's that money for cities and counties. This bill, this HEROES Act, actually kind of reworks it and kind of takes it out of the governor's hands and gets that direct funding right into those cities and counties that need it the most. And as you know, that's here on the Central Coast. I've received plenty of calls in my discussions and meetings with cities and counties, supervisors, city councils, basically saying we need that funding. The taxes are not going to be there. Therefore, how are we going to fund our heroes? Hence the name of the bill. How are we going to fund police, fire, sanitation, our teachers, and so forth if we don't have the taxes to pay for it? So this is why this bill is so important, because it bolsters that funding for those state and local cities and counties, especially those less than 500,000. We obviously hit on testing more. I believe that's very important. 75 billion for testing is very important. There's more direct payments. We expand it to not just, because in the CARES Act it's 1,200 per adult, 500 per kid. This makes it 1,200 for every member in your household, up to $6,000.
Wow.
We make sure that there's the employee retention tax credit. This takes upon a bill that I introduced with Mike Thompson and Steve Horsford and Ron Kine from Wisconsin. That basically encourages employers to keep employees on payroll and allows them to use refundable tax credits for fixed costs like rent, utilities, and mortgage payments, which is very important for our small businesses. Of course, it improves the Paycheck Protection Program in a number of ways, and then it also extends unemployment benefits, bolsters housing assistance, strengthens our supplemental nutrition assistance program, and provides other resources for our elections, our postal service, and make sure there's an accurate census count. So there's a lot in it. Don't get me wrong. There's a lot in it. It's a $3 trillion package, but right now it's just I admit, this is a Democratic proposed bill. Since we're in the majority at this point in Congress, it's a Democratic proposed bill that we are going back to vote on Friday. Then we're sending it over to the Senate, and we'll see what happens. So it's not in law at this point. Whereas the past bills, we knew we were going to vote on it. We knew that it was going to be enacted and signed into law by the president. This one, we're not sure, but we knew that we needed to do something based on the improvements and the necessary resources that were needed that we heard from our constituents. And so that is why we're putting forward this very big package, knowing that there are going to be negotiations in the Senate with the White House going forward. But we just hope that when they do that, they take into account what we've taken into account, and that's the people, that's the cities, that's our heroes, our police, our fire, people like that who are going to need it the most as we go forward to fight this pandemic and get through it to the other side and start the recovery process as well.
Wonderful. That sounds great. So what else are you doing to assist small businesses at this point? They in our district, they seem to be very impacted.
Yeah. No, look, I mean, we've seen the hit that our hospitality industry has taken. That's, our number 2 industry here on the Central Coast, with especially our restaurants and our hotels, basically, kind of going under this self-induced coma, as I call it, based on the fact that we sort of had to shut things down in order to limit the spread of this pandemic. Rightfully so, but as we know, basically there was a lot of help that was needed by our small businesses here on the Central Coast. Now, you know about, and we've talked about, and I've helped you and other members of this community with the PPP that stemmed from the CARES Act. But it was good, and things were, fortunately, businesses were able to get those loans, but it wasn't a smooth process, as you know. And just kind of let me read you some numbers. With the PPP, so normally the Small Business Administration administers 60,000 loans for $30 billion in 1 year. 60,000 loans, $30 billion in 1 year. Over 13 days through the PPP, the Small Business Administration administered $1.6 million loans for $350 billion, again, just in 13 days. So there were some issues in regards to getting that money out there and getting it to the people who deserved it the most. And things need to be improved, and things need to be a little more streamlined in order to make sure that lending institutions had the funds available, had the authorities and regulations opened up a little bit to administer these loans, but also to make sure that the appropriate people were getting these loans, those small businesses that need it the most. And therefore, I and myself and Don Beyer, a congressman from Virginia, put forward the Paycheck Protection Program Improvement Act, and parts of that are in the HEROES Act that extends the period from which you can use the loan from 8 weeks to up to 24 weeks. It allows them, it makes it more accessible. It provides a certain percentage of that package of the new PPP and the HEROES Act just to those small businesses that have 10 employees or less, because obviously they had to compete with franchises. They had to compete with some of these, I guess I'll quote them, I guess I'll say it, bigger, smaller businesses.
Yeah.
And they didn't have the relationships with the lending institutions like those bigger, smaller businesses did. So this allocates a certain percentage just to those small businesses with 10 employees or less. Provides a little more clarity and flexibility with the loan program, more time to rehire employees, more time to pay back the loans, and making it more accessible to smaller nonprofits as well. So these are the types of improvements based that are in the HEROES Act that are based on the concerns that I heard from people like you and the people you work with and the people you serve. That's why it's very important that we continue to hear from people here on the Central Coast, how they're being affected, how they're getting these benefits, how they're not getting these benefits, so that we can do a better job making sure that government works for them. And with the HEROES Act, with this section, especially when the PPP, I think we've done that, and hopefully this is a type of bill, at least this part of the bill makes it through the negotiations in the Senate and gets signed into law.
Great, great. Well, you mentioned a couple things there. You mentioned hospitality, and you also mentioned municipalities and charities. We just recently heard that a big event on our Central Coast has been canceled, the Concours d'Elegance. This will impact not only the businesses, but the municipalities and tax dollars, the charities with the millions of dollars in charity revenue that they raise. Especially given our, how is the Central Coast uniquely impacted given the fact that we are so heavily dependent upon hospitality?
Yeah, I mean, just saying it, you lay it out there. I mean,
Yeah.
it really is. It's our number 2 industry. It's what makes us so unique and so great here on the Central Coast. Not only these events, but these events that highlight what we have here, be it our beauty, as seen behind you, or be it our bounty over there in the Salinas Valley and our agriculture. And that will always be there. Therefore, I believe our businesses and our industry will always be there as well. It's just making sure that those small businesses that have been here that we don't want to have, and nor do I ever think we're going to allow this here on the Central Coast, that this area is run by franchises. That's just not the flavor. It's not our nature. It's not who we are as denizens of the Central Coast, thank goodness. And we're very proud of that. So it's making sure that those businesses that are here, that do provide that flavor of taking advantage of what we have here, that they survive this. And that's why the PPP is so important. That's why bills like the HEROES Act is so important. That's why the CARES Act is so important. And that's why making sure that as we open up, we are opening up, but we do it in a way that we don't get to a point where I do 1 step forward and 2 steps back. And so we do it with the proper tools going forward. And so, like I said, I believe that this is a tough time, and the economic disaster is very, very real. But so is the public health aspect of it, and we have to play our part. This isn't a choice between our economy and our public health. It's both. And we can do that, but we just got to be smart about it going forward. And that's why where I believe Congress has come into play and actually did our job in a bipartisan fashion by providing the funds necessary, federally funded, upon which the state and local entities can make sure that they have the resources to go forward, slowly open up and do it in a safe way. And therefore we can and will continue to build on what we have here, not only with our existing small businesses, but eventually, hopefully, new small businesses that pop up as well. But it's just making sure that we continue to take care, not just of the employers, the employees as well. In the HEROES Act, there is funding for our essential workers. We have to realize that there are people are continuing to go to work during this pandemic and taking risks that are necessary in order to get to work. You look at our farm workers. These are men and women who know how to take risks. We understand that. They've taken a risk to come here. but they're taking risks when they go to work every day. And so we need to make sure that they are protected and provided for as well, so that we can have our food supply, and that when our restaurants start to open up in whatever capacity they can, they continue to have that food as well, and that supply chain as well. And so, it's these types of things that we have to watch out for. It's this type of attitude that, you have, that you see with all your colleagues here on the Central Coast have, to continue to go forward. But obviously, itching to get open, but doing it in a very smart way based on science.
Sure, absolutely. So, I have to get a real estate question in. Is there any relief coming for our renters and homeowners?
Yeah, thanks for asking. And the answer is yes. And yes, in the HEROES Act going forward. This is a big issue with basically rental assistance and mortgage assistance. Clearly, there was a bill put forward by the chairwoman of the Financial Services Committee that basically did I believe that I got behind. It provided $100 billion in emergency rental assistance, which is very important. And it didn't just, basically say all rents are free. What it did is basically provide a fund upon which landlords can then use to make sure that people are able to meet their rents and the rental payments, I should say. So it's actually a very good bill. And then on the mortgage assistance, the CARES Act actually provided 6 months of forbearance on federally backed mortgages. We wanted to apply to all mortgages, but this is just federally backed mortgages. And then the HEROES Act, sorry for going back and forth, but I wanted to make sure you understand everything that's going on. In the HEROES Act, there's an emergency rental assistance program that would allocate funding to states and territories for all rental property owners, not just those that are federally backed. So that's why I had to make that distinction.
Okay.
CARES Act, we provided that relief for those in federally funded housing. The HEROES Act would provide it for all renters and mortgage payers as well. So, it opens it up as well. It creates like I said, the HEROES Act creates a $75 billion homeowner assistance fund, which would support states, territories, and tribes to address ongoing needs of homeowners struggling to afford their housing, due directly or indirectly to the impacts of COVID-19 by providing that direct assistance with mortgage payments, property taxes, property insurance, utilities, and other housing-related costs. This is something that's clearly needed here on the Central Coast, knowing the prices of houses around here. The price of housing, this would be very important. And so it's these types of things that I believe is important. It also has a section in there for homelessness as well, which I know you and your colleagues are very concerned with, authorizing $11.5 billion for the Emergency Solutions Grants Program to enable state and local governments to finance housing and health-related services for the hundreds of thousands of people that are experience homelessness, not just here on the Central Coast, but all across our country, obviously. And then this is good because this is big, as you know, the state and local tax deduction for 2021.
Yay!
I know. It would repeal the cap on that for 2 years.
Okay, fabulous.
So I think that's very important to us here on the Central Coast.
Absolutely.
We know that. It's something that we've been fighting for on the Ways and Means Committee for quite some time now. And it was actually taken from a bill put forward by my good friend Tom Swazi out of New York. As you know, New York, New Jersey, California are the ones that got hit the hardest with that that repeal of the cap on with that cap on the salt.
Yeah.
And this would take that cap away for 2 years. So,
well, that's very exciting.
Yeah, let's hope it. Like I said, this is we're just putting this forward. Let's hope we're voting on it in the Congress. Let's hope the Senate does the right thing, and basically understands how important these provisions are to people, not just here on the Central Coast, but across this country.
Absolutely. One of your hallmarks is working across the aisle to get things done. How have you been able to do that in this instance?
Yeah. I mean, like I said, you got to look at the 4 bills that we passed. They were all overwhelmingly bipartisan and all signed into law by the President of the United States. So, I mean, I think that's right there on its face is you're seeing the bipartisanship. But, one thing it makes you see and realize is that there is governing by crisis and there's governing by leadership. And you just hope that bipartisanship doesn't end at the end of this crisis. You hope it lasts. And let me tell you, as you know, that's something I try to do, not just during this pandemic, but in all times, because I believe that that's how we should legislate. I don't just represent Democrats, I represent Democrats and Republicans here on the Central Coast. And I think that's proven in the legislation that I've supported, the legislation that I voted for, not just the provisions that we've passed in the past month, but the work that I've done on the committees and going forward on a number of areas that affect the Central Coast. It's also demonstrated in what I just got today, this thing called the Lugar Report that lists basically it gives a bipartisan index for all of the 435 congressional members, and I am number 42 out of
Yay.
435. So I think that clearly it's not just
That's
me
a lot.
saying that I'm bipartisan. You have the Lugar Center, McCourt School of Bipartisanship, that actually does an index on it and actually takes certain factors into account. And I'm number 42, number 2 in California.
Wow.
And like I said, this is, as you know, I mean, we have a blue district. I don't need to do this. Actually, for some, I could be putting myself in political jeopardy for doing this.
Mhm.
But the fact is that I believe it's the right thing to do. And I will never, ever sacrifice my values and the values of the Central Coast to be bipartisan. That's not how it works. I'm bipartisan because it benefits the Central Coast. I've seen that in the last 3 years that I've been in Congress, and I believe in that going forward, and hopefully the next few years that I'm in Washington, D.C. So I look forward to living up to this score that I received and continuing to work with Democrats and Republicans in order to do what's right for the people here on the Central Coast of California.
Well, you're doing a fabulous job. We appreciate, I know the hard work that you're doing and the hours you're putting in, as well as your staff. And we really, truly appreciate your leadership. And that is a huge honor that you ranked in that report. So thank you for all you're doing. And if there's anything we can do for you to help you out, please let us know. We're here for you.
Well, and I appreciate that, Kim, but it's doing what you have been doing, especially you. You know how to get a hold of me. You call me when there's an issue. You call me when we're doing something good. You let me know when we're doing something bad. But that's important, and we need to know that, or we're not doing anything that we're not hearing about. I mean, that's the
Yeah.
thing. We rely on you to reach out to our office to make sure that we understand what's going on. And that's why I would continue to recommend that you and your colleagues and people that you know and anybody on the Central Coast, that when there are federal issues that you need help with and we should be working on, you got to let us know. 831-424-2229. Call us up. Let us know if you have a federal issue. Like I said, I've taken this job and look at this job as I've learned this job, is that we are here to make government work for people. And in my role as a federal representative, my job is making the federal government work for you, for our constituents here on the Central Coast, with a housing issue, with an IRS issue, with an immigration issue, with a veterans issue, with a Social Security issue. Those are federal issues that it's my responsibility to be that bridge from the people here on the Central Coast to Washington, D.C. and back. I value that type of work, and I know that that's what this job is about, actually helping people and being able to affect them in a personal way with these personal issues at the federal level. And so I look forward to continuing to do that, be it in this pandemic and thereafter.
All right. Well, please stay safe and healthy, and we look forward to hopefully seeing you in person soon.
And thanks for all that you and your colleagues do for all of us here on the Central Coast and allowing us to live here and enjoy the Central Coast. So keep up the good work and know that
Thank
we are
you.
here to help you in any way we can when it comes to the federal government.
Thank you so much.
Okay, thanks.
Nice to see you, Congressman.
See you too.
Bye.